Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Aisha, and I'm one of your Solid State Circuit Society staff members. The topic of today's webinar for Young Excellence is Bridging Academia and Industry, Fostering Innovation Through Collaboration. Attendees of this webinar have the opportunity to earn a certificate of participation for attending this webinar. I will put a link in the chat box with instructions on how to obtain the certificate. The webinar video and slides will be posted on the SSCS YouTube channel after the webinar. Please use the Q&A or chat section on your dashboard to ask any questions. I now invite SSCS Webinars for Young Excellence Committee member to introduce our speaker and give a few welcoming remarks.
Hello everyone, welcome to the SSC webinars. Today's topic is Bridging Academia and Industry, Fostering Innovation Through Collaboration. And we're honored to invite two speakers, Dr. Farhana from Otera and Dr. Fabio from Delft University of Technology to talk about this topic. And I would like to take a few minutes, introduce about ourselves. We are the IEEE SSS Young Professional, and we have a couple of benefits joining our Young Professional committees, and also as a member. We have a resource center including the technical tutorials, short courses, and webinars. We have distinguished lectures. We provided student travel grants, doctoral achievement awards, and circuit design contests. We also provide up to 1,500 young leadership volunteer travel awards for SSCS conferences, and we encourage you to become a young professional leader in your local SSCS section. We also host SSCS Young Professional Network events at SSCS-sponsored conferences. We have a new mentoring platform named Kronos, which connect with the leading SSS mentors and mentees at your own pace and time. For any details, please go into online with this link to see more details. Our next event will be happened on the ISCC on February 16th. It named as a networking bingo, which is also joint organized with SSCS Women in Circuits. Currently, we have 7 committee members, including myself, and also we have a YouTube channel, which includes all our past SSCS webinars for Young Excellence. So I would like to welcome to our speakers again, Dr. Farhana and Dr. Fabio, and I would like to hear more from you. Thank you. So which one will go first, Fabio or Farhana?
Sure, I can go first. Thank you for the welcome. I have one slide that I'd like to just share. So let me just move a few things out of the way. So in terms of industry and academia collaboration, I personally think it's a win-win situation, especially if we are pretty clear about the goals and the direction and the timeline associated with the collaboration. So on the academia side, typically professors and students, they want to do sort of, leading edge research. It typically is associated with a PhD project. They will, or a master's project, and they want to get, some kind of result out of that. It could be basically a paper or a PhD thesis, or even a patent sometimes. Sometimes it's even useful to do this through an internship, but it has to be pretty clear on what the internship goal is. And then how is it going to be funded, and what is the source of the funding? Another way for academia and industry to collaborate is really through an industry fellow program where a person from industry can go and, spend some period of time at the university and interact with the professors and students when they work on a common project. Now, but all of these things have to be very clearly outlined, and basically the expectations have to be clearly set between, both academia and industry collaborators. Otherwise, things can go south. Pretty much they may not work out as you expected. So it's pretty important to be on top of this, and then also to have regular check-in sessions. If the project is very, very important, then maybe it's on a weekly basis, maybe it's on a monthly basis, but definitely you need to have a regular check-in as well. On the industry side, and I've been mostly on the industry side, and I'm pretty sure Fabio can talk more about the academia side, but I'll quickly switch to the industry side, is that on the industry side, industry typically has to make sure that what they're funding in terms of research and what they're collaborating with universities on is, it makes sense for the company direction. It should have management approval, and it should also have some kind of significant impact to the company itself in terms of either getting into a new technology or moving ahead in the field. Sometimes a company expects patents from this collaboration, and that can be a point of contention because sometimes universities don't want to patent, they want to just open source things. And so setting clear expectations and a timeline and the goals and the direction is really, really important for both, for the industry side as well. Sometimes industry can fund an internship, or they can hire the student and then work with the professor, even as a full-time or even as an extended internship. And I've been doing that quite a lot in my 15, 16 years at Intel and now at Altera. Now at the bottom I put down what the benefits are, because we were asked about that. And on the industry side, definitely, new technology, we, tend to get ahead in the field. For example, we could work with a professor or a student, and then we could get ahead in the field. And, I have a pretty good example of things that I've done, and we can get into that a little bit later. Well, definitely patents are very important for a company. Publications are also give the company visibility. And then, one of the big benefits of this is that we get to hire very good people. We know the person, we know the student, and we make a good relationship with the professor, and that builds up a nice hiring pipeline with other students that the professor might have that are junior. This also helps develop the people in the company itself. So you learn mentorship skills, management skills, and you get more visibility in the company, and you actually learn more. So I think all of these put together really results in a lot of great innovation. And I've been a party to that. I've had, many patents that I've done with interns and university collaboration. So I definitely think it's a win-win on both sides.
All right, thank you for your sharing. And Fabio, can you share what you think about this topic?
Yes, so I agree on most of the things Farhana said. So I will look at it from the other side, from the academic perspective. And I will just highlight by words a couple of points. So first of all, from the personal perspective, okay, there's the perspective of, for example, the students at university, and the perspective of the professors. Now, if I look at the students, I think collaborating with a company is a great opportunity. As Farhana said, is a personal learning, a personal growth, and also is it launches people into their careers. Often, students that work in project with companies in my group go on to work with that company later on. So from a student perspective, it's always very interesting to get exposed to a company. Now, from a research group perspective, from a professor perspective, one of the things I would like first to answer, at least give my view, is why we should collaborate with industry. Well, one of the pragmatic answer would be, okay, for the money, for the funding, of course. This would be a simple question, because funding from the companies come in cash, in kind, whatever forms, And you may ask, is that better than public funding that we get from grants or proposals? Well, in one sense, no, because the topic then is led by the company. So you have to work on a topic that is of interest of the company, with the timeline of the company, with some string attached. It's not free money. But on the other hand, still looking at from the pragmatic side, it's a nice way to get funded, because you don't have to send a proposal that you write and and you send out and you don't get any information back. But it's a contract, is an agreement that you do with the company together. So you together decide what's interesting for both parties to research on. So on that side is very interesting, and you can go and agree towards multiple iteration and learn along the way. So the pragmatic aspect is you do it for the funding. But on the other side, why it is interesting for universities to collaborate with companies? Well, in fields like engineering, especially for integrated circuit research, I would say that the companies often are the ones who knows what the problem is. So they are the ones who look at the application, the ones who sell the products. So often we get companies coming to us with a very difficult challenge, with a very difficult problem to solve. And that's great, because then we can have, we have a very clear goal. Okay, solve the problem. Maybe the company doesn't have a solution, but he has the problem. And that's something that universities are very happy to have challenging problems that are just waiting for a solution. So eventually having this contact with the companies enable us to have a better view of what the relevant problems are. So you avoid, looking to maybe useless areas. Now, what else is the reason why we collaborate? Well, from the university perspective, I think that we're also looking, apart from the money, apart from the challenging problems, we're also looking for different expertise or capabilities. For example, sometimes you want to collaborate with a company because they have access to a very advanced technology. They can offer 3D integration, they can use FinFETs, they can offer quantum processors for the research we do here in Delft. So you can have access to this technology by collaborating, but also you can have access to expertise. So for example, universities often are good in terms of circuit design to develop an IP, a very advanced super duper circuit with very advanced performance, but we are very bad at integrating, at building a large chip, to do system on chip, to do packaging, to do integration, while companies have a very large expertise on that. So collaborating, we can each bring an advantage. Now, from the company perspective, of course, Farhana said a lot from that perspective. You would ask, okay, why companies would not put that funding to do their development their own. I think in some sense, it's more agile sometimes to find somebody external to do some of the task. But also, I think what is the key is that universities have a very difficult way to look at problems. So sometimes maybe naive view, or can be a different view. It's definitely different. So we usually have a different mindset, a different. We have students which also have a very, they are blank slate that can look at problems in a different way. And also often companies come to us because they have the need for different expertise. For example, we have expertise of circuit design, but also on something else, maybe more on device, more on specific applications that they don't have inside, so they can tap into these things. Now, finally, a couple of things I want to highlight is that the nice thing of collaborating with companies, from my perspective, from my experience, over the years, I've collaborated with many companies, including Intel, Fujitsu, NXP, which has a large presence here in the Netherlands. So these are the companies I work on a daily basis. And one thing I learned is that if you want to collaborate with a company from a university perspective, it's not that you go to a company, you go to Intel and say, oh, let's make a contract, or wait for the company to come to you. You have to talk to 10, 20 companies before you set up an agreement, a collaboration. But still, it's a lot of time, but it's not wasted time, because by doing that, you build a network, you learn more about what companies are doing, and you continuously improve your vision, your proposal that you bring around. So it's much more, I think, fruitful than keep writing grants from the ones of you who are in academia. I think that's an interesting point of view. And then once the research collaboration is in place, okay, it's very difficult to get it started, I should say. But even once it's, so the main challenge, I think, is to convince a company that they should collaborate with you. I think that's the most difficult things. But even after that is done, there are a number of challenges. Maybe you can talk more about that. But for example, aligning on the goals, on the timeline, on the risks, because in industries and universities has a completely different understanding of all of this, especially timelines and risks. So understanding each other is a challenge. And also very important is how to efficiently let the information flow from company to university, and especially, if you have a research results, how that will flow back to the company. That's a big challenge. It's not easy, but you have to put effort on that. And with that, I would give back the word to Sean. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Fabio and Farhana, for sharing your viewpoints about this topic. While both of you have talking about a lot of benefits and also some motivations between the collaboration between the industry and academia, I would like to ask some questions about how do you think about addressing the challenges of this collaboration. My first question is, industry usually pursue tight timelines and high yield, while academia pursues innovations and high performance. How do you think you can address the differences in goals, timelines, and expectations between academia and industry?
Who do you want to answer? Who should answer first?
Um, maybe Farhana, you can answer first.
Okay, okay.
If you prepared, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So basically, I think innovation happens on both sides of the fence. I think innovation happens in academia and innovation happens in industry. Now, the timelines are definitely very different. Sometimes the timeline in industry, even for research, is typically about 5 years. Sometimes it's longer, but those are pretty rare cases. It depends on kind of the technologies that you're working on. Like, for example, quantum computing is a very longer timeline that's more amenable to university collaboration, I would say. But there's other things that are on a shorter timeline. And on the shorter timeline, I think it's important for industry to realize that academia doesn't work at the same pace as industry and doesn't have the same resources as industry. And a lot of times industry folks forget about that. And they expect the same level of quality or the same level of speed from an academic student or a professor. And that really shouldn't be the case. You really, as an industry person, you have to realize that professors and students don't operate at the same level as industry, and you have to give them a break in terms of quality and timeline. But you can manage all of this by putting in, clear expectations and making sure that so like Fabio said, starting the project is the hardest, and putting in the right mechanisms for the flow of information is really, really important. So making sure that when you do get into a collaborative situation, you have a clear agreement. It could be a contract or it could be some kind of agreement under the umbrella of the company's university research office, and it could be through an internship. So typically, you have some kind of agreement where you have the flow of information and the expectation on timeline. So I think to address this challenge, really trust, respect, and making sure that you have the right agreements and mechanisms for the flow of information.
Yeah, if I can maybe follow up on what Farhana said, I agree on this. I would highlight that indeed is understanding each other. Is really the goal is to make sure that you understand each other. That and eventually, I think it's important when you do that you also split the task, the research task in a proper way. So typically, you would like to give university, that's a simple example, the long-term high-risk staff, while you leave, the high complexity, maybe lower risk to the companies. So if you manage it the right way, you give the right task to the right partner, it's a win-win situation. Of course, it can be a nightmare if you do the other way around, and that can happen. So I think it is indeed important, both from university and from companies, because I can say, okay, once you've done it once, twice, 3 times, on both sides, you see people understand each other easily. But it's also true that if you are new to the job, it's very easy for people in the industry to misunderstand what we are capable of, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So expectation management is very important. So I fully agree on that.
Yeah, one of the things that I want to point out is a specific example that we run into with one of the challenges with collaboration is that in the beginning of the program, it wasn't very I'm not going to name names, but it was a program that we had with the university. And in the beginning of the program, it wasn't clear what was going to happen with IP, right? So was it going to be, something that was shared between the university and Intel, or was it not, right? So, but in that situation, the academic professor, he went ahead and filed a patent and neglected to include, Intel people on that. And so, that situation got a little bit tricky. And so we had to go back and remedy that. But it doesn't bode, it doesn't leave a good feeling on both sides, is that, someone went ahead and did something without asking the other party, whereas they were supposed to be collaborating on the same program.
Yeah, I think that's a very good example about the failed or not very pleasant collaboration is lack of communication between the industry and academia. Yeah, I think that's all good answers for this question. My second question is also another challenge I could think about this collaboration is why the academia likes to publish papers on any new innovations about the project, while the industry usually like to hide them because they don't want the other competitors to grab this outcome. So how do you balance the publishing academic papers with the need to protect the IP for commercialization? Maybe Fabio, you can go this question first.
Yeah, that's a good one. So eventually, the simple approach we take, the pragmatic approach in all the collaboration we run, and I think that's also a good approach, is to every time before we publish, we ask ourselves the question, and often we try also to the companies to say, oh, is this something that is worth a patent? And then we do that. Of course, I should say that sometimes it's a challenge because we are all often, even if you have done tens of times, sometimes I also myself I forget, and we want to rush for the deadline of a paper. We want to go to ICC. We have the deadline, and then the last minute say, oh, we have to patent it, and then we also rush our patent attorney to do that. But in general, it's possible. So once you have a nice paper written, before submitting it, it's quite easy to make a patent application out of it if you have the right patent attorney. So that's okay. One thing, however, that I think is very difficult is if you want to keep something like a trade secret. Some company, some specific things, you want to do that. You want to not even to make a patent because you want to hide it, because maybe it's difficult to identify if some competitor use your trick, your IP. That's something, of course, is a no-no for us because it's very. I can understand it could be very interesting for a company, but that would be very challenging. To tell to a PhD student, okay, you cannot publish this idea, you cannot get your PhD because. But patents these days, I would say, and maybe I would stress that it's not only in company collaboration. Even when we have public funding these days, we are looking very actively in academia into patenting our results because you never know. You want to have a spin-off out of that. At least I could say in Europe, at least for patenting, filing a patent and having it protected for 1-2 years is relatively cheap. So we do, I wouldn't say on everything we do, but quite extensively in the last few years. So we try to build, also university try to build an IP patent portfolio. Also to attract, by the way, it's also a good thing to attract later companies. If you have a patent portfolio, it's also useful for upcoming collaboration with companies. They're also invited maybe to come. They see you can patent, so it's also attractive for them. They can use your patent, you can license them, so it's a win-win situation. I would say that for any academics, I think it's good to ask yourself the question for anything you publish, is this something I can patent?
Right. So yeah, I can jump in here, is that I've been on both sides. So it really depends on what, the university and the company agreed to at the beginning. So for example, some universities are very much, we don't do patents, we do everything open source. And so, that when you're doing a collaboration like that, you just have to have that expectation that, because they the university will like to open source something, and if it's really related to a student's PhD thesis, then you have to be respectful of that, and you have to be aware of that. On the other hand, if there is some real important technology that you feel like you've been working with a student through an internship or something that warrants a patent before a publication, then you definitely should make sure that the professor knows about it, that we're going to take this internship work and we're going to patent it. It's okay for the student to cite that patent in the thesis, but we will go ahead and make sure that we file the patent while the student is still working at the company. So those type of agreements, really, like Fabio said, getting started is the hard part. So once you have all of that worked out, then I think it's pretty clear on what's going to happen. But definitely, companies do prefer to file inventions before they pull out the the writing pen and start writing on papers and publishing them.
All right, thank you, Farhana and Fabio, for sharing your points about this question. So my next question would be like more practical and like for everyone to view how a collaboration will go. So my question is like, can you share an example of a successful collaboration you have been a part or have witnessed before? Maybe Farhana, you can go first on this
Sure,
question.
yeah. So many of you know that UCIe is becoming kind of a industry, semiconductor industry standard for die-to-die connectivity and PHYs. And so in the early days when UCIe was still very in the nascent stages, we had AIB. When I started working on a heterogeneous integration, I thought, oh, maybe we should have AIB 3D. And so we started working on it. And then eventually, we thought, okay, this would be a good proposal for UCIe 3D. But I didn't have the bandwidth at that time to really focus on understanding a lot of the 3D constraints that would be impacting design, for example. And so, Berkeley, Professor Nikolic, he said he had a student and who was interested in this area or getting into this area. And so he said, would you like to, have him come and join you as an intern? And so, I got manager approval to have him as my intern. And we started working on this, and this became actually part of his thesis because we decided ahead of time that this was going to be part of his thesis. And so it was pretty clear what the terms and conditions were going to be. And so we started working on this research, and we had, the student work on this area of understanding the constraints of 3D heterogeneous integration and 3D connectivity, die-to-die connectivity. And eventually what happened is that we got a paper published at CICC and actually won the best paper award, which was really great. And then it became part of his thesis. And then the proposal that we had put together along with collaboration within the company, and the student was on a long-term internship with us. And so he got to interact with our standards team, our packaging team, and all together as one Intel, and plus this internship, we actually submitted our proposal to UCIe for UCIe 3D, and it got accepted, and now it's part of the standard that was published in August of 2024. So I think this is a huge success story, and the best thing about this was that we ended up hiring this student as a full-time person at Intel and Altera.
Thank you for sharing the example. So, Fabio, do you have any good examples to share?
Yeah, maybe one of the best example that at least it happened to me, to my group, was one of the first big results we got in a long-running collaboration we had, in fact, with Intel. So Farhana may remember that. So at the start, it was very tricky for us to get access to Intel technology. It was for all the legal terms, the NDA, was really messy. But both from Intel side and from Delft side, we really pushed to make it happen. And once it happened, we were able to basically focus on two things. So from the university perspective, we were trying to basically, the final goal was to try to build a cryogenic chip using FinFET technology that could drive a qubit. So we had the expertise and the knowledge on what needed to be done and how to do it. And so our students was a small team of students focused on really the core IP. So doing a full sort of RF transmitter from the baseband up to the RF. But then, of course, it's more than that, because this is a very complex technology. You need to put the digital backend, you need to put the packaging, just even getting the layout correct. It's a nightmare. And now we know how to do it, but at that time it was quite tricky. So eventually, the team at Intel was very supporting to give all the help, everything that was needed around .IP. So there were the central IP that we developed, but then around it there was, this was I think was a 2x2 square millimeter chip in 16 nanometers. So it was a huge chip. So required a lot of effort in terms of layout, in terms of designers and so on. So it was very clear what we had to do and what the company was supporting and what it was giving. And then we worked as a team to make it happen. And eventually that chip was a chip named Ostrich, after the coldest place in Oregon, and was sent to ICC. We got one of the best awards at ICC. We got a lot of publicity because of it, because it was one of the first to handle such a large level of complexity, and he had a high level of innovation too. So on both axes, complexity, application, innovation, went very well. So that was quite, I think.
I worked on that chip.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I did the integration.
We saw both sides of that. Yes.
I did the digital and the integration on that chip.
Yeah. So
it was a really, I second Fabio. It was a very good collaboration. I mean, we got all the learnings from them on the signal processing and some of the design techniques, and then we actually implemented it, and we actually did some microarchitecture improvements and stuff. So we actually it was quite challenging to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But in the end it all worked out. So
yeah. You also need a good share of luck, I should say. Sometimes that doesn't harm.
Yes.
All right, so thank you for sharing the good examples about the collaboration. So my question is about on the other end, like, do you have any seen or heard any of the failed attempts to collaborate between the academia and industry? Share some examples and maybe give some opinions about what lessons have you learned from those failed collaboration. Fabio, can you go first on this question?
Yeah, maybe. So I have a few examples where we've really failed to start a collaboration, really at the very beginning, and maybe also connect to one of the questions from the audience. So Stephen asked, how does it work with funding? About, for example, sending gifts, which is something eventually that, at least in Europe, at least in the Netherlands, doesn't work very well. So sometimes one of the difficult things is that at least our university here, in general, the Netherlands university, the Dutch university ask, before you start a research project, before you can ask a PhD, it's not that the companies just give you any money and then you can do something. We really ask, okay, we have to hire a person for 4 years, you have to give us money for 4 years. And I can tell you it's not a negligible amount of money. It's comparable of what you would hire a person at a company, I think. So it's a significant amount of money. So it needs a lot of commitment. So I think most of the times we have very good understanding with companies. We have a lot of discussion. We agree on the technical terms. We are ready to start. But once company has to commit for a longer term, as Farhana mentioned before, you have to commit at least for 4 years. That's our horizon. That's usually the shorter horizon, and that's very difficult sometimes. Often we get into discussion like, oh yeah, we will do it for 4 years, but we cannot put in writing that we'll do it for 4 years. Every year we need to renew, and that for us, unfortunately, although we know that likely will go through, we cannot commit to that. So that's really problematic. And also something that we all sometimes fail to start is we don't get an agreement on the IP rights. that's often really difficult discussion. Nicely, it's often I'm out of the loop for this. I can bring in my people at different level of the university that helps on that, because it can be very nasty discussions. So in general, I could say that I'm pretty lucky, or at least happy, that I never had a problem into the collaboration, but more at the beginning phase, because my take on this is to be very careful, not jump into anything, but just be sure that we have the right ground rules at the start. If they're not there, I'd rather not get into it. Sometimes you have to. So my take on it is sometimes you have to be careful and just say no. It can be interesting, but you have to be sure that you are understanding each other and you are working with the right partner. So that's the case where it gets wrong. But usually, it's to me, it's at the very start, at the very beginning. Maybe Farhana has some more difficult examples. I don't know.
So yeah, there has been some examples of unsuccessful collaborations, and I think one of them that was in my mind, that basically we started working with this one professor under what is known as a seedling grant at Intel. So basically, it's a small amount of money just to kickstart an idea, and then typically we see if that idea blossoms into something larger. But it's a good way for a professor to put like a couple of students on a program and see if the research will yield anything. And so we had one idea that was in the wireless realm that we were, I guess, interested in sort of pursuing, but obviously it was a little bit far-fetched that nobody really wanted to do it at Intel, but they wanted to have a collaboration with a professor, and so we identified a professor and we started working on this with the professor. But unfortunately, I'm not really sure where things kind of spiraled out of control. Was that it basically turned out that the professor and us, maybe the project wasn't properly managed, or maybe the professor was too busy, or maybe the student didn't really want to work on that specific topic. But what happened is that we really didn't get much done. And so it was a 3-year funding, but it was basically every year you had to prove that you were making progress, and you had to renew the funding. And so after the first year, we started getting warnings from our corporate university research office that there's not a lot of progress here, and we haven't seen much progress. So can you make sure that you start making more progress on this program? And so we decided to push the professor some more, and the student, and it just didn't work. And so in the end, the professor lost the funding, and that program didn't really complete. And these things happen. I mean, these things happen, right? Sometimes it just doesn't work out.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing these failed examples, and I hope we can learn some lessons from these examples, and we can improve our collaboration in the future. I have one last question before we kick into the audience Q&A. So you have already shared about some practical methods to collaborating, for example, through the funding mechanism, internships, joint research. And do you have any other methods to share? And what do you think about the pros and cons of these different methods? Maybe for Hannah, you can go first.
Sure. So Intel makes it pretty easy to do collaborations, just because we have a very strong university research office, where the mechanisms for different types of collaboration are already put in place. So we work with NSF, we work with SRC, we have memberships in different labs in different universities. For example, I graduated from Berkeley Wireless Research Center. That's at Berkeley. It's a membership-based lab where there's multiple industry members who put in a membership fee, and then they get access to the research results before they get published. So when you have a a framework that allows you to collaborate. Like, for example, Intel even has those seedling grants that you can submit research proposals to and identify professors who you'd like to work with. You know, when you have this framework in place already, it becomes a lot easier in terms of the legal agreements, the legal terms and conditions, and that actually helps getting started a lot smoother, and you don't have to do a lot of extra work. So one of those, I would highly recommend that, you know, if you're in a company and you'd like to work with a professor, make sure you go talk to your, you know, university collaboration office if it exists, and make sure that you know what kind of programs they have in place to facilitate the collaboration. The other way that you can collaborate is through government grants. So, for example, in the United States, they have, you know, different ways of getting government grants. There's the National Science Foundation, there's the Defense Department, like DARPA, for example. And you can write proposals together. And if that proposal gets accepted, then you're both working on that contract with a funding agency. So that's typically done outside of the university research office, but it can be also done in collaboration with the university research office. So, you know, there's many different ways of getting that collaboration funded and going through that. The other way that you can potentially do this is you can talk to your corporate office and say that, hey, I'd like to have a professor, you know, come and be part of our team for some period of time, and is there, you know, funding available to partially fund this, right? So, for example, a professor could choose to do a part of their sabbatical at the company and then work with people in the company, and we've had that happen. And then the other way around is that, you know, hey, can I go spend, you know, 6 months at this university and work with the students and the professors and collaborate with them on their program? So that's another way that can happen. So there's, I think, many different mechanisms.
Yeah. I also like what Farhana said. We also try to do a lot of this to attract company people, for example, principal engineers, people like that, you know, that can have a part-time appointment at our university. For example, 1 day per week, 1 day every 2 weeks, you know, 10%, 20%, not need to be long. Companies are very happy to do so because, you know, they get the presence of the company at the university. They can attract students, which of course, you know, I think companies, one of the biggest problems is to attract the right people, right? And we have the people. That's the one of the richness of the university. And eventually we try to do that a lot because it helps also to create a long-term connection. It's not one point in time. You work together for a long time. You get to know each other. That helps a lot, I think. So I think university is a winning thing. It doesn't cost university anything because, you know, just a desk. Somebody is there. You get to talk to some people. Of course, you have to be a little bit careful about, again, the IPs. That's, you know, you have to be careful how you arrange that. And then one thing that, you know, at the low, so this we try to do as much as we can. Next to that, I think you can get one of the lowest level is to send students for a short time to a company. For example, we do a lot of master thesis. You know, our master thesis, for example, at Delft are up to 1 year long. You can send one student for 1 year. You can just be at the company and do some work at the company. You don't even know about that until they come back. Or you can also do shared projects. So I do that a lot, especially with the local companies. It's easy. So you get a student there, but, you know, you also the company likes that you don't get only the expertise of the student working, but you also get expertise from a professor. So you have weekly meeting and so on. And that often the advantage is that it's very low threshold. You can do easily as the student like. The students love it because they're exposed to a company. Often they start working at the same company they are there. But also it's nice because is a seed for future collaboration. Often what do we see? Okay, you get something, you get a chip, it works. Oh, let's do a PhD out of it. And then the company is very weak. They know the person. They have, you know, they work for you for already a few months, 1 year. So they are it's very easy to, very easy. It's easier to convince your management that this leads to something. So that's one thing. And maybe a final topic, final mention to what Farhana said, also connected that about governmental funding. So it's true that before, when I was starting talking at the beginning, I was talking mostly about company putting money on the table to fund research. That's one way. But of course, there is plenty of opportunities for companies to participate in consortia for research. In Europe, for example, European Union or Horizon Europe, somebody from the audience, Giovanni, mentioned that, or also nationally, all the funding bodies, to my understanding, all of them, really like when you do a research proposal with universities and companies. So eventually, for a university professor like me, it's very useful to have a large network of companies when you do a proposal to call your contacts. Say, oh, do you want to participate to this consortium on this project? Because there is a win-win situation. We need the industry to show that what you're doing is relevant, and the companies don't even have to put money usually. They even get money from doing the work. So that's something that you need. So that's where the network is very important.
Yeah, and then the audience pointed out too is that there are many research consortiums that have industry membership, like SRC, for example, and so your company is already, if your company has a membership there, right, your company is already paying into that. So definitely, if you're in a company that has a membership with one of those research consortiums, you should definitely try to leverage it, because there's a lot of students that get paid from that, and it's pretty much you just have to go to you just have to reach out to the students and the professors that are part of those programs and get to know them and work with them, and it can be beneficial to both you learning something new or you helping the student and mentoring the student, right? So definitely take advantage of that.
Yeah, maybe one thing to add on that. That's honestly, I really like this way of working. In the US, it's very common to have this also, to fund the university with gifts, or to this consortium, which is like without strings, sort of, right? Yeah. Eventually, unfortunately, in Europe, this is very rare. So, for example, it's very rare to have this kind of funding. So I'm not sure if this, the tax regulation, which are different and so on. So companies are much less invited, let's say, by the environment, by the conditions, to work like that. Usually, all the collaboration I've had is really about, okay, we want to work on X, let's make a contract one-to-one, we work on X, you deliver this, and we pay you to do that. So it's really focused. So there are always a lot of strings attached. So we have been successfully in setting up this collaboration also for long term, to commit for 4 years or so. But I think we should also in Europe look now to get the US setting alive also here. It's not my responsibility, but I think somebody should really change that, because we are really lacking there, I think, in terms of inviting companies to put some small token of money to fund also more open research rather than just focused research. That we have very little of that, or none. For example, in the Netherlands, there is no instrument like that.
Thank you for sharing this point. And the next section, I'm going to the audience Q&A. I have some questions already. The first one is for Farhana. The question is, have you had any issues where there are differences between agreements with the university professor and the student? For example, if the student owns their own IP, how do you address these different levels of partnership? For example, the university and the professor and the student?
Well, if it becomes an IP issue, we usually don't get into, if it becomes, adversarial like that, where, the student says, it's my IP or whatever, we tend to drop the relationship and drop the collaboration, and we typically don't go back
Okay.
because we've had a bad experience. But but it is rare that it happens, because we work under the umbrella of all these different frameworks that are in place already at the company. Those type of situations are very, very rare, and if something does arise, we tend to work it out. So like, I had an intern from Berkeley where we worked on this project together, and it was part of her PhD, but because it was a very important IP, we did file a patent for it, and it was an Intel patent. But because she wanted to use it in her PhD, there was a little bit of issue in terms of how do we get this into the PhD, because Berkeley typically is open source, open IP. They don't typically, but we worked that out, and it basically it was fine. So.
Thank you. So the second question is to Fabio. So what are the differences between small and mid-sized companies and large cooperations in engaging with academic institutions?
Okay, the difference between a small and large company. So, well, I think that also related to something I said before. So, I think only the big companies, like like the Intel, the Fujitsu, from my experience, the really big company, the Google or so on, the big company are attractive in a sense. They are the only ones that really can commit on large scale, long term programs, because they have the economy behind to back up these large programs. So this is one thing specific to them. For the small one, or even for example, I recently we are starting now in January a project with a very small company. It's a startup, so he has 3 employees. Now I think 4, but when we start discussing, so it's a very small company. And there, I think, of course, they cannot commit, to pay you anything. But the only way to collaborate with them is on one student basis, on doing a project proposal together. But eventually, the other advantage is that they are very open. So they are very, very small company. They are very agile because they are starting. They're really looking for funding. They can still, change the direction very quickly. So it's very easy to interact with them on, well, sort of crazy ideas also, right? So you can really make a proposal on something that you decide together. You can stick together that matches both of them. And often the advantage could be that many instruments, for example, any funding instrument for the governments, are also towards spin-off or startup or this kind of smaller company. So I think from my suggestion for anybody in academia that wants to do this is, and that's true in any field in life, I believe, that you need to have a portfolio. So you don't only need the big companies, you need also the small ones and the mid-sized ones. So you have, I think it's a wise move always to try to diversify. So it's like like when you are in the stock market, you don't want to put all your bets on one horse. But it's good and bad of all of that. So so maybe one thing that is also different is that for the bigger collaboration, you are eager maybe to go and talk to somebody on the other side of the world, because then you can spend effort. But for this smaller collaboration with the startup or with the medium-sized company, you want to be literally on the other side of the street. That's really what you want to have. Otherwise, I think it's very difficult to make it. It's not impossible, but I think that's the best. If you're really, well, at least in the same country, let's put it like that, or not too far. That would be an advantage, I would say. That's at least my experience.
Thank you for answering this question. So next question is to Farhana, and this one is actually interesting. That's also one question that I want to ask. Is from the company's perspective, what will be the main differences between using their own research team, development team, and versus to collaborating with the university?
So, so there's 2 reasons why you would want to use collaborate with universities, right? One is that you want to build a relationship with the professor and the university, and you want to, like Fabio said, you want to probably have a nice long-term relationship with that university so that you can have access to their precious resources, which are the students, right? So the companies need to hire, right? And they're always looking for new minds and new bright minds. Right? So typically universities would love to have relationships with universities that, you know, turn out the best and the brightest, right? So that's one big reason where you would want to have collaboration. Sometimes also those universities are also doing some leading edge research. They're pretty visionary, and the company hasn't gotten into that space yet, and they would love to work with that university. So one of the examples is that, you know, 10 plus years ago, you know, in Toronto, you had, you know, AI taking off. And so then, you know, you had Google Brain setting up shop, and then the Vector Institute came around, and everybody wanted a membership in the Vector Institute because AI had started taking off. And so, you know, companies want to collaborate with universities because they seem to be doing things that are new and upcoming. The other reason why, you know, it's important to collaborate with universities and students and research at universities is that sometimes you don't have the resources or the know-how, you know, or the time to spend on a research problem that may be very, very important for the future of the company. And it may be a longer term thing rather than a shorter term. If it was shorter term and had high priority, definitely the company would want to use its own people to do it. But if it's a longer term thing and they don't have the resources, and it, you know, it's not the immediate priority, then definitely collaborating externally with a university it's important, because there's two benefits of that. A, you get some of the difficult research done, which takes time, and B, you have a relationship with a student that is going to graduate around the time that you would want that person to be hired in the company, so that they can carry forward those ideas within the company itself. So these are two very important reasons.
Thank you for sharing your answers. Yeah,
Maybe I can add one thing to
sure.
this, because I really recognize what Farhana says, but one thing that also happens sometimes is that I think, you know, I agree that smart people are everywhere, right? They are in university and in companies, but also not so smart people are everywhere, right? So that's true. But one main different thing of universities is that we have the freedom sometimes to work for a very long stretch of time on the same problem. So sometimes, you know, I have colleagues at university that have worked for 30 years on temperature sensor in CMOS. So that's the freedom that you have at university. And then you can, as a company, you're always driven by all kind of different requirements. You have to switch from project to project. You have to change topics sometimes, depending on the products you're working on. So I think that's a freedom that gives, you know, for people who want to stick on a topic for a long time, and you build such an expertise which cannot be matched anywhere else. So that gives an edge that the companies sometimes want to tap on specific expertise. That's kind of unique, I think. You don't find it into the business world.
Yeah, great answers to these questions. And I think we have one last question before we conclude this webinar. And this question is for both of you. What are the best practices for overcoming cultural and communication barriers between the academic and industry teams? Fabio, maybe you can go first.
Yeah. One thing that I think it was mentioned before, Farhana mentioned it, I also hinted to it, is communication, I think. So is understanding each other. And I think it's very important to understand that it's not only about, you know, the language, you know, but having experience of each other environments. So often one thing that I think is important as an academic is to have spent some significant time in industry. So this happens often in our field, in IC design. So we see people, you know, myself, I worked for many years at NXP Semiconductors before coming to TU Delft. And that, I think, helps you a lot. Because when I talk to, you know, my counterparts in industry, I understand what they're talking about, you know, but it's not just understanding the language. It's really feeling, you know, because you know how a corporate world works. What does it mean to deliver a product? You know what the timelines are. You know what are the constraints? Because and I have this experience. You know, I work a lot on quantum computing, on circuits for quantum computing. So I work a lot with physicists, and physicists typically, at least academic physicists, they have no clue how a company works. And you really see the difference now this kind of people, which has never experienced a company environment at all, how they interact with companies, it is much more difficult. Of course, over time you go ahead, but it's not so easy. So that's something I think that okay, it's not easy. It's not something you can change from day to day. But when we are a new faculty member, I value a lot that this person has spent a couple of years in a company to do something company oriented. I think that's important to have these people on your team also at university. It risks a lot, any collaboration.
Okay. Yeah, so I can add to what Fabio was saying, is that I think there's many opportunities to try to understand each other, and many of them come at conferences when we get together at conferences. So, I have a lot of conference friends where, I meet them at conferences, but nowhere else. And so what you do is at these conferences, make sure you reach out to someone on the other side and say, hey, let's go for a coffee. Let's have a chat. Let's go for lunch. So I think that really helps break down the barriers and helps, if you're sharing what you're going through and they're sharing what they're going through, and you kind of try to come to an understanding. And sometimes what that happens is that it sparks, it's like, oh, that's a really cool idea. Let's go work on it together, right? So I think, having that interaction, that informal interaction is really important. And that helps you with, bridging that communication gap.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for, yeah.
Just to add a small anecdote on the last things Farhana said, because I fully agree that the informal interaction works a lot. One of the largest projects we are running now in Delft, which is a 10 years collaboration, with a lot of people, is really about was started by a discussion in a bar. Not with me, but with one colleague, started really this interaction in a bar, and it ended up with this huge project. So informal interaction is really important. I agree with that.
Okay, I think that's last question of this webinar, and I think it was a good discussion about the collaboration between the academic and the industry. We talked about the benefits, the motivation, and some challenges, and both speakers also gave some good and bad examples about the collaboration so that we can know how it works and how we can improve in the future. So I would like to thank you, Farhana and Fabio, again for joining this webinar, and for the audiences. The recorded webinars will be uploaded to the YouTube channel within a week or so, so you can revisit it if you want. And I think that's conclude this webinars, and I would like to thank you everybody for joining this webinar again, and hope you have a nice day.
Thank you.
Sean.
Thank you for hosting.
Farhana and Fabio, if you are comfortable, if you could share your emails in the chat. There was a few people asking if they could send you questions. So if you're comfortable, just add your emails to the chat.
Yeah, I'll do. You can also Google my name. It should show up easily. And here it is.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.